Olivia's story, ladies and gentlemen. I had no idea that one wrong decision would have such consequences. My marriage would collapse and my husband, once a tender lover, would turn to enmity toward me. Imagine, my friendship with my spouse's boss seemed innocent, yet it caused an irreparable loss, the loss of my beloved husband and best friend, as well as the respect of my colleagues. My name is Mary. I am a 30-year-old event planner by heart, and this activity has stirred my passion for many years. My spouse, Gabriel, at the age of 35, is a talented architect. Our marriage, which took place just 3 months ago, has been the true epitome of happiness. We met through a mutual friend and it was love at first sight. Gabriel immediately struck me as extremely charming, and I thought it was just a game to win my attention. But I was sorely mistaken. One of my best friends, whom I met in college, has always been there for me. We have been through many trials together. Her birthday last year was celebrated with a great party, just like every year after college graduation. She decided to throw her traditional birthday party. I knew that and had always spent a lot of energy organizing her parties, and I had always supported her in those endeavors. This was also the case when we were having lunch together and she was telling me about the upcoming party. We discussed the details and I looked forward to the event as I always did. When the day of the party arrived, I dressed to impress and headed to the venue. After wishing my best friend a happy birthday, at her request, I accompanied her to greet the guests together. It was a wonderful evening, but after a few hours I felt tired and decided to say goodbye to Anne, who was in another part of the room. On my way to her, I accidentally bumped into someone. After apologizing, I continued on my way and informed Anne that I was leaving. However, she insisted that I stay a little longer. We were chatting and a man approached us and exchanged pleasantries with him, and I remained standing next to him. And later introduced me to that man, and I realized it was the same man I had encountered earlier. After apologizing again, Anne told me about him, declaring him to be the guy she had mentioned earlier. I suspected that Anne had deliberately arranged our acquaintance, even though I didn't know anyone like that in her circle. She had left me alone with this stranger, Gabriel, and I was unhappy with what she had done, but I realized that she had done it with good intentions, for it had been a long time since I had been in a serious relationship. Gabriel and I struck up a conversation. He shared a lot of things with me, except for personal details. I asked him why I had never met him before, even though he was close to my best friend. Gabriel replied that he had seen me from afar but wasn't sure if he should approach me. I told him that he could just walk over, but he never made up his mind until that evening. When I informed Gabriel that I had to leave because of an upcoming event the next day, we never exchanged contact. I said goodbye to Anne, agreeing to meet for lunch in a couple days. The next day I had an important business meeting due to an event I was organizing. Thoughts of Gabriel continued to hover in my mind, for the evening I had spent with him had been truly wonderful. Although I knew some of the people at the event, it was his company that I found most enjoyable. After not getting his phone number, I felt sad, thinking that maybe he didn't have the same feelings for me and that's why he didn't ask for my number. Determined not to dwell on it or worry about a man who may not have shown interest in me, I tried to distract myself. The next day, meeting Anne, we discussed fashion, as we often did, but she mentioned Gabriel again. I explained to her that our conversation at the party had been nothing more than casual conversation and not of serious importance. If he had been genuinely interested in me, he would have asked for my phone number, but he hadn't. Anne expressed surprise and began to convince me that I shouldn't wait for a man to take the initiative, but to take action myself. She always got what she wanted and was not afraid of a direct approach. To my surprise, Anne took my phone and, without waiting for my consent, dialed Gabriel's number. When he answered, I had no choice but to talk to him. After I introduced myself, Gabriel expressed surprise, as he hadn't expected my call at all. I explained to him that we never got around to exchanging numbers after our conversation. Our conversation lasted a few minutes, and at the end he invited me to lunch, to which I agreed. As we wrapped up our conversation, I felt awkward and embarrassed. I didn't want to sound desperate, but as always, and was supportive, and we even laughed about the situation. I informed her that we had a dinner planned for the next day. That same evening, I went to visit my father. We hadn't spoken in a long time, and my desire to reconnect was mixed with misunderstanding and resentment. I never knew who my father was, and when I finally found him, I didn't know how to feel. In my imagination he had left me, but in reality it turned out he never knew I existed. He asked for a chance to come into my life, and I decided to give him that opportunity. I didn't want to punish him for something he didn't even know he was doing. That night spent with my father was filled with attempts on my father's part to be not only a support for me, but something more that I truly appreciated. Tired from the long day, I went home and got a good night's sleep the next day. On one of my work days, I met a couple getting ready to get married. Their mutual love and happiness made me excited and also a little jealous, because I also dreamed of such a warm and close relationship. But I tried not to delve too deeply into these thoughts, as I am often prone to overthinking and over-experiencing. Having finished meeting the couple, I was waiting for lunch when Gabriel came to pick me up and take me to my favorite restaurant. I was sure it was Anne's doing. Gabriel, as always, charmed me with his charm, and we had a wonderful time. He shared with me his story of losing his family and how it had changed him. I was sad to listen to him, as I too knew what it was like to be without family. After lunch was over, Gabriel drove me home, promising to meet again this week. However, it has been a month since I last heard from Gabriel. I can't understand why he cut off communication so suddenly. I thought we were doing well. I tried to contact him several times over the course of a month, but he never responded. I concluded that maybe Gabriel didn't have the same feelings for me, and I was plagued with doubts about my persistence. A few days later, however, Gabriel showed up at my store and explained his absence by his workload, for which he apologized. I understood him, because I know what the workload can be like. We began to meet more often, and these meetings brought us closer together. After a few dates, he invited me to become his girlfriend, and I agreed, having waited for this moment for a long time. Our bond with Gabriel grew stronger with each passing month, and our relationship turned into something truly wonderful. I met some of his friends, which was a nice addition to our romance, and kept insisting that she was the one who played a crucial role in our acquaintance. But I never gave her full satisfaction, claiming that Gabriel and I could have met anyway, given that I had attended her parties over the years. This bantering game continued between us, and Anne loved it. A few months later Gabriel proposed to me, and at that moment I was gripped by panic, not knowing what to say back. Gabriel was patient, giving me time to think about it, for which I was grateful. He didn't rush me into an answer, and that gave me confidence. I turned to Anne for advice, and she, with her persuasive words about how much Gabriel loved me and what he was willing to do for me, helped me to calm down. The next day I told Gabriel yes, and his joy was unparalleled. We started planning the wedding, and it was an incredibly happy and exciting time in my life. My father walked me down the aisle, and I had never seen him so proud. After the wedding, Gabriel asked me to move in with him. I was hesitant and suggested that we should look for a house together and pay for it together. However, with my busy job and upcoming vacation, I realized that looking for a house could add another challenge to my work schedule. In the end, we decided to live together. Our living together has been going smoothly and pleasantly. Our life together with Gabriel was filled with waking up next to each other in the mornings, eating breakfast together before work, and evening dinners with friends and family. I always felt safe and comfortable with Gabriel. He was everything I dreamed of and more, attentive and determined. One day at the store, after a meeting with a customer, Gabriel came in to see me. He told me that his boss had a birthday party planned for the next day. I was a little surprised, since he mentioned it out of the blue, but Gabriel explained that it was a surprise party. I was curious since I didn't know his boss. He was absent from our wedding due to work commitments. Despite this, I decided to accompany Gabriel, not wanting to leave him alone. I asked Anne to help me pick out an outfit, and as always, she outdid herself by suggesting the perfect outfit. The next day, Gabriel and I headed to the party. When we arrived at the venue, we found that there were already many guests gathered there. Over the course of the evening, Gabriel introduced me to various guests and we chatted. Everything was going great. At one point I excused myself and left to go to the bathroom. When I came back, I saw that the birthday boy had already arrived, but because of the crowd of people around him, I couldn't see him. I called Gabriel, letting him know that it was time for me to leave given the late hour, but he insisted that I meet his boss before I left. After a while, Gabriel approached me and together we headed over to his boss to wish him a happy birthday. However, the boss was busy talking to important guests and Gabriel asked me to wait for a while. We waited for about an hour, and I was starting to get angry about waiting so long. It seemed unfair to me that we had to wait so long, no matter who he was. When we were finally invited in, I was already quite annoyed, but I accepted the situation. I didn't plan on just forgetting about it out of respect for Gabriel. Meeting Gabriel's boss turned out to be the most unexpected and shocking experience of my life. Standing in front of me was Ross, my ex-boyfriend who left without saying goodbye. I was stunned to learn that he was now my husband's boss. I decided not to show that I knew him, since it had been so long and I was now married. When Gabriel introduced us to each other, I noticed the shock on Ross's face, but he decided to play along, pretending it was the first time we'd seen each other. This was good for me, because I didn't want to embarrass Gabriel because of his past history with his boss. We wished Ross a happy birthday and left the office. All evening I pondered the strange coincidence of Ross being my husband's boss. Gabriel noticed my concern and asked why, but I decided to keep quiet about my past with Ross. The next day I went to work, trying to distract myself and immerse myself in things. Later, Anne came over to my place and we discussed the situation with Ross. She was surprised by this turn of events, but I asked her not to say anything to Gabriel. I wasn't planning on reconnecting with Ross, and then strongly advised me to stay away from him, especially since I was now married and considering how Ross had once left me. I decided to follow Anne's advice, because I didn't want to damage my marriage to Gabriel. A few weeks later, while cooking dinner at home, I met Gabriel coming home from work. We had dinner and he told me about the upcoming annual gala organized by his company. I was excited about the opportunity to attend this event, and my excitement grew when Gabriel informed me that I could be considered to host the event. This represented a huge opportunity for my business. My happiness was only dampened by the fact that Gabriel had suggested the idea to his boss, Ross, and I was to meet with him the next day to prepare and discuss the details of the event. Despite my misgivings and past relationship with Ross, I was determined not to pass up this opportunity because of our shared past. I decided to accept Gabriel's offer and thanked him sincerely for this wonderful opportunity. The next day I went to meet Gabriel's boss and we drove together to his office. There, as usual, I was made to wait, but I reminded myself that I was there for my store and this event that could take my business to the next level. As we entered Ross's office, we exchanged greetings. He apologized for the delay and offered to start the meeting for lunch. I was upset by his irresponsible attitude, but decided to remain calm. Later, I told Gabriel about Ross's offer to have lunch together to discuss business. Gabriel didn't see anything strange about it and advised me to be patient. Back in the office, I focused on work, but by lunchtime I was feeling frustrated and nervous about the upcoming meeting. At the restaurant, Ross arrived before me for the first time. We sat down and proceeded to discuss the event. He outlined his wishes in detail and I wrote down each one. During dinner, I couldn't resist reminding Ross of how he had dumped me. He tried to justify himself, claiming he had good reasons, but I didn't want to hear his explanation. Despite my resistance, Ross insisted that I listen to him. He confessed that he was facing a choice between me and his family, which came as a surprise to me since I had always known of his deep attachment to his family. However, he wouldn't reveal the details of his choice, promising to do so during our next lunch. I explained to Ross that I was no longer going to meet him for lunch given my marriage, but he assured me that it would just be a business lunch that my husband was aware of. In the days that followed, we were busily preparing for the event. It was a major event requiring extra hands to work, so I hired more staff. Everything was going smoothly, but the issue of lunch with Ross was still hanging in the air. I had been putting off this meeting, but realized that I would have to eventually pull myself together and meet with him to discuss the final details of our collaboration. I met Ross for lunch where we finalized all the necessary preparations for the event. He apologized for his actions a few years ago, and I was glad that we could put the past behind us and focus on the upcoming event. The day of the event arrived and everything was ready. I went there with Gabriel, who was proud of how I had transformed the place. During the course of the evening, I noticed that Ross was looking at me a lot, and it struck me as odd. When he came over to talk to Gabriel and me, his hand inadvertently touched mine, and I thought he was flirting, which was completely inappropriate. A few weeks later, Ross showed up at my store, wanting to invite me out as a token of his appreciation for organizing the event. I politely declined, but he insisted on a date and we had fun reminiscing about old times. After that meeting, Ross started sending me flowers and calling me every day for a few minutes. He said he wished he had met me before I was married, and admitted that he still had feelings for me and wanted to make up for lost time. I decided to give Ross a chance, and we had dinner together a few times. I didn't think it would hurt my marriage to Gabriel, but I realized that keeping the truth from my husband was a lie. I tried to discuss with Ross the possibility of confessing to Gabriel about our acquaintance, but Ross insisted on keeping it a secret for fear of losing his best employee because of our past. I convinced him that since we hadn't done anything wrong, the right thing to do would be to tell Gabriel the truth, but Ross insisted on keeping the secret. Our meetings continued, and I felt a growing comfort and convenience in Ross's company. My husband, suspicious of my late dinners, thought it was just because of work. One day, upon meeting Ross, he told me that we should spend more time together. I reminded him of my marriage and how badly things could end if Gabriel found out about our secret meetings. But Ross continued to insist on more time together, ignoring my concerns and warnings. I now deeply regret my decision to spend time with Ross, as it led to problems in my life and marriage. I began to rarely show up at home and at the store, making excuses for Gabriel about meeting with customers. He believed me for a while until Ross left on a business trip. My resentment intensified when I realized I missed Ross. To try to improve my relationship with Gabriel, I suggested that we have a romantic dinner since our relationship had been struggling in recent weeks. That evening helped us restore intimacy and order to our relationship. However, when Ross returned, I started dating him again. On one of those days, we happened to run into and at a restaurant. I didn't know what to say since she had warned me to stay away from Ross, but I didn't heed her advice, and secluded herself with me and sternly warned me that I was making a big mistake by dating my husband's boss. Despite her words, I didn't listen to her, thinking it was a small thing, and went back to Ross. I didn't realize that and had already informed Gabriel of my location. He came to the restaurant and saw us together with Ross. I stayed with Ross that night and woke up next to him the next morning. Realizing that and had been right in her warnings, I felt a deep sense of guilt. I hurriedly packed and went home to apologize to Gabriel and tell him everything. When I returned, however, I found that Gabriel was extremely angry and had already signed the divorce papers. He refused to listen to my explanation, saying that he probably would have forgiven me if I hadn't slept with his boss. I felt unbearable pain and guilt, made worse by the realization of my act and the consequences it brought. Gabriel asked me to leave our shared home, and I followed his request. I realized that Ross had tricked me, taking advantage of my moment of vulnerability. When he found out I was married, he interfered in my life and caused the destruction of my marriage. I recently signed the divorce papers, and Gabriel and I are now officially separated. It was a grueling and painful process. I felt miserable realizing that I had lost my husband because of my own stupidity. I had been happy in our marriage and I knew my husband loved me, but I had chosen a path that led to a man I was unsure of my relationship with. After all that had happened, I learned that Gabriel had quit his job and started his own business, eager to start a new chapter in his life. I was happy for Gabriel, despite everything that had happened. During that period, and admitted that she had informed Gabriel about my meetings with Ross. I was furious at her actions, but explained that she wanted me to realize where my decisions could lead. She was acting out of a desire to open my eyes to the fact that I was risking my marriage for a man who wasn't worth it. Since then, I often think about how I wish that situation had never destroyed my marriage. After everything that happened with Ross, who eventually stopped communicating with me, I realized that I had lost a lot. My relationship with also changed and I lost all contact with Gabriel. I now live with my father, who has been an invaluable support to me. Without him, it would have been extremely difficult for me to overcome all the difficulties I faced.